Joining us now, NBC's Courtney Kube at the Pentagon and retired four-star general and MSNBC military analyst Barry McCaffrey. Courtney, we've seen a lot of different reports on what exactly Elon Musk was doing at the Pentagon today. Tell us what we know.
We don't know a whole lot. I mean, we know that he arrived here just before 9 a.m. He met with the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, and some senior military officials, including General Alvin, the head of the U.S. Air Force, for about an hour and a half, leaving here about 10:20 a.m. Now, what's critical is they did not meet in the tank as we had expected. That's sort of the room that you often hear about military leaders talking about operations and war plans and things. Instead, they appeared to stay in the Secretary of Defense's suite area, so his office and outer office area, for the full hour and a half or so that they were here. Now, officials tell us that there were a number of different topics that they were set to discuss. That includes DOGE and cuts, but there was expected to be a China briefing as part of this. Officials here telling us that it was an unclassified briefing, but that they could have discussed more sensitive, secret, classified, some level of secret information as part of that briefing. But what's really important here, Chris, is the briefing itself that he was to get was supposed to be of an unclassified nature. Now, one of the concerns that we are hearing about is the possibility that he received the China war plans. There's been some media reporting on that. President Trump, in an Oval Office meeting today, was asked specifically about those reports and very specifically about this idea of Elon Musk receiving war plans for China. Here's what he had to say.
Because I don't want to show it to anybody. You know, you're talking about a potential war with China. Now, I deal with these people all the time, and I'm dealing with Pete. I'm dealing with these gentlemen on numerous different airplane purchases, and I think they're all going to be great. But I don't want other people seeing, anybody seeing potential war with China.
Chris, here's the nuance, okay? The war plans or the operational plans for China would involve things like targets and potential assets that would be used, ships, aircraft, whatever it is. It's very possible that they discussed some elements about the possibility of a conflict with China today, but without actually providing the full operational plan. So there may be a little bit of gray area here. Again, we were told by defense officials that one of the topics of discussion today was expected to be China.
So, General, I just got my hands on a letter that was sent to Pete Hegseth from Tammy Duckworth, U.S. Senator, and also, of course, a veteran, and Elizabeth Warren. And they want to know what went on today. They say it remains unclear exactly what information he received, but they say this. Although it may satisfy his curiosity, there is no legitimate national security or other rationale for providing this information to Mr. Musk, who is not a military or national security expert, is not a member of the president's cabinet, and is not even serving as a permanent federal official employee. Although Mr. Musk is ostensibly engaged in an effort to cut wasteful spending, there is no need for him to obtain access to some of our most sensitive secrets to do so. And then they ask point blank, did the Pentagon today provide Mr. Musk with a top secret briefing on U.S. war plans for China? Is that a question that members of the U.S. Senate have a right to have answered?
Look, the bottom line is Musk is, no question, a brilliant, successful, creative tech leader in the business world. And so his input would be valuable on anything talking about space or missile systems. And I think they ought to welcome his participation. Having said that, he is not a Senate-confirmed officer of our government. His agency, DOGE, was not created by Congress. He has enormous conflicts of interest, both with the U.S. federal government and, needless to say, with China, where half the Tesla production is in Beijing. And so it's not clear to me why he would have a passing briefing that might allow him to decide what technologies are acceptable for future warfighting, which might benefit himself. And why would he have any necessary expertise on this? You know, the fact you're a genius like McNamara, it turned out to be one of the worst secretaries of defense we ever had. So it's a chaotic, unhappy situation for national security.
There's also questions about whether he would have input on the way money is given to the Pentagon, to the military. He has, of course, been tasked by the president with cutting the federal budget. It's hard to do. We've seen the reversals that have happened. By his own admission, he said that they've made mistakes. DOJ has made mistakes. What would you make of that? What could that mean for the military budget? Who should be looking at that?
Well, look, this is the most gigantic organization on earth. Its purpose is peacekeeping and deterrence. The technologies it deploys take 5 to 15 years to mature. It's a collective leadership responsibility. Under Article 1 of the Constitution, the Congress plays a vital role in money. The strategy is a plan and its associated budget. Some of those staffers on the Hill have got 30 years of dealing with these issues. It's not something subject to the sort of capricious look in a short period of time by someone who's very bright. So it's a disaster potentially moving forward.
General Barry McCaffrey, always good to see you. Courtney Kube, thank you as always for your reporting.